The air in Grandpa William's study turned to concrete in my lungs as my father's words landed like physical blows. "We've already put down $250,000 for Blake's wedding and honeymoon package." His voice had the practiced detachment of discussing a business transaction while my entire world imploded. My vision tunneled to the embroidered monogram on his dress shirt as he refused to fund the surgery that would save my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Behind him, rain streaked down leaded glass windows, each droplet racing another like the tears I refused to let fall. In the next room, champagne glasses clinked. Someone laughed. The doctor's referral burned in my pocket where I'd placed it just an hour ago, promising myself I'd return to the hospital with good news. My name is Lucas. I'm 28 and a struggling architectural photographer. This is the story of how I rebuilt my future from the ashes of my parents, betrayal, and how my grandfather's final act of love changed everything when everyone else had given up on me. $250,000 for Blake's wedding, I repeated, the words scraping my throat raw. And you can't spare $90,000 to save your son's life? Mom's fingers tightened around her heirloom sapphire bracelet, the one she dangled as reward for my good behavior throughout childhood. "We simply can't, Lucas," she said, her voice crisp as freshly ironed linen. "The deposits are non-refundable." The Persian rug beneath me seemed to shift, the intricate pattern swirling like the MRI images showing the tumor gradually crushing my spine. Dr. Reardon's words echoed in my mind. "Without surgery in the next month, you'll lose function in your legs permanently. Eventually, the damage will be irreversible." "Maybe you should have planned better," Mom whispered, adjusting her bracelet. "There are consequences to poor financial decisions. I might never walk again. And you're worried about a party." My voice emerged from some hollow place I didn't recognize. "Always so dramatic." Blake's voice cut through as he leaned against the door frame, champagne flute dangling between his fingers. His fiancée Olivia hovered behind him, her diamond ring catching the light. "Get better insurance next time. Some of us have actual plans for our future." I reached for Mom's wrist and unfastened the sapphire bracelet. "Take this back," I said, placing it in her palm and closing her fingers around it. "I'll find another way." Dad cleared his throat. "Lucas, be reasonable." I straightened my spine, shoulders back, chin lifted despite the pain shooting down my back. I've never seen more clearly in my life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Walking through the crowd of whispering guests, I felt their eyes on my back. Someone murmured, "Poor Richard and Victoria. That must be the troubled son." Another replied, "Such a shame. Bringing drama to Blake's special night." The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate Jake. "Any luck?" I looked back at the glowing windows of my parents' mansion. My childhood voice echoed in my mind. "Mom and Dad have the biggest house ever. Do they love us big too?" I typed my response. "No, but we'll find another way." And I knew I would never knock on that door again. The digital clock's red numbers burned into my consciousness. 29 days until Dr. Reardon's deadline. I paced our apartment kitchen at midnight, phone pressed against my ear, my voice raw from hours of pleading with yet another loan officer. "Please," I whispered. "My spine will be permanently damaged without this surgery." "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, without collateral or a better credit score." The line clicked dead. I slumped against the refrigerator where my photography was displayed. Architectural shots I'd taken for my struggling portfolio. My latest project showed a restoration of an abandoned theater, breathing new life into forgotten spaces. In the corner of one photo I'd written a quote, "Beauty exists where most stop looking." Jake entered the kitchen, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He placed a crumpled check on the table. $6,000, he said quietly. "Finally sold the gaming setup and my entire vintage record collection." I stared at the check. Jake had been collecting those records since high school, working weekends while I built my fledgling photography business. Jake, you love those records. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I love you more, man. Your family. I added the check to our pile. Our life savings. Jake's emergency fund. The record money. Still $45,000 short. It's not enough, I whispered, dropping my head to the table. Jake's arms encircled my shoulders. We'll find a way. The doorbell rang at 6:13 a.m. I stumbled to answer it, wincing at the pain shooting down my legs, still wearing yesterday's clothes. The rejection letter from my Last Hope charity stuck to my cheek, pulled free by static as I opened the door. An older man in a tailored suit stood on our porch, briefcase in hand. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture was military straight, despite his age. Lucas Bennett? His voice was formal but kind. Yes? My voice cracked. My name is Harold Winters. I'm the executor of William Bennett's estate. Your grandfather. In our living room, he perched on the edge of the sofa. His weathered hands opened the briefcase methodically. Jake appeared from the bedroom, surprise flickering across his face. I've been trying to reach you for several days, Harold said, laying out documents on our coffee table. Your grandfather passed away last week. I blinked, confused. Grandpa Will had been estranged from our family for years, after a falling out with my father. I'd only met him a few times as a child, and then again last year, when I'd reached out to him after finding his old photography equipment in our attic. We'd reconnected over our shared passion, meeting for coffee twice before he'd fallen ill. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I didn't know he was gone. Harold's eyes softened. He spoke very highly of you, Lucas. He was impressed by your photography and your determination to make it on your own terms. Jake shifted beside me. I didn't know you were in touch with your grandfather. It was recent, I explained. Dad always said Grandpa was irresponsible with money, that they disagreed on how to run the family business. I found his old cameras and reached out. We only met a couple times. Harold nodded. William knew about your condition. The spinal tumor. I stiffened. How? He kept tabs on you, paid for a private investigator to check in occasionally. My throat tightened. He was watching out for me? Indeed. And he made some arrangements before his passing. Harold slid a document across the table. He left you his entire estate. The room blurred as tears filled my eyes. I stared at the document, unable to move. The total value is approximately $800,000. After taxes and fees, you'll receive around $650,000. Jake's hand gripped my shoulder. Luke, that's enough, I whispered. It's enough for the surgery. And then some. Harold smiled gently. There's more. Your grandfather left you his cabin in the mountains. And this. He passed me a sealed envelope. He asked that you read it privately. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee. I clutched Grandpa Will's letter, its edges soft from countless readings over the past week. The surgery had begun 3 hours ago. Jake's hands trembled as he signed the last of the financial forms. The hospital administrator nodded, satisfied with our payment. $90,000 from Grandpa's inheritance. The rest safely invested for my recovery and future. Jake sat across from me, a thermos of homemade coffee between us. He'd barely spoken since arriving, just settled in for the long wait with quiet determination. Hour 4 passed, then 5, 6. When Dr. Reardon finally emerged, surgical cap still on, my heart stopped. His tired eyes crinkled. The surgery was successful. We got all of it. My phone buzzed a week later. A text from Blake. Mom wants to know if you survived. Also, you're causing drama about my engagement dinner. The message surprised me. I'd blocked my parents but hadn't thought to block Blake. He'd never shown interest in my health before. I stared at the screen. Another text arrived. Dad told the Hamiltons you were too irresponsible to afford proper insurance. My voicemail icon flashed. Father's voice filled my ear. Your actions reflect poorly on this family's reputation. I deleted it without listening to the rest. The mail arrived that afternoon, a cream envelope with golden embossing. Blake and Olivia's wedding invitation addressed only to Lucas. No mention of Jake, no mention of my recovery. In my hospital room, Jake sat beside my bed, helping me sort through Grandpa's old photographs. My hands, still weak from surgery, followed his movements as we organized decades of memories. "Look at this one," Jake said, holding up a faded picture of a young man standing proudly beside a classic car. "Is this your grandfather?" I nodded, taking the photo carefully. His first big assignment, he documented the restoration of classic cars for a magazine in the 60s. Jake handed me another photo, my grandfather in his studio, surrounded by cameras and prints. He was really talented. He was, I agreed, my throat tight with emotion, and no one in the family ever acknowledged it. Dad always said photography wasn't a real career. I unfolded Grandpa's letter again, reading the words that had become my mantra. "Lucas, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've watched you struggle from afar, seen your parents dismiss your dreams the way they dismissed mine. Your father chose security over passion, and he's tried to force that choice on you too. Don't let him. I'm leaving you everything, not just to save your life, but to give you the freedom to live it authentically. The greatest revenge against those who don't believe in you isn't proving them wrong. It's living so fully in your truth that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Your photography shows me you see the world the way I did, finding beauty in forgotten places, dignity in decay, and hope in restoration. Don't let pain, whether physical or emotional, dim that vision. With love and faith in you, Grandpa Will." Between physical therapy sessions, I sorted through Grandpa's photography archives. Thousands of negatives, prints, and slides spanning 6 decades of work. My hands grew stronger as I cataloged each image, discovering a legacy I never knew existed. Jake brought home takeout and sat cross-legged on our apartment floor, surrounded by photos. "Your grandfather documented everything from civil rights marches to architectural transformations of the city. This stuff is historical gold." I stared at a series of images showing an abandoned factory being converted into affordable housing. He didn't just take pretty pictures. He told stories of rebirth. As I regained strength, I made a promise to myself. I would never be vulnerable like this again. Not financially, not emotionally. And when I rose from these ashes, I'd remember who was there to fan the flames of hope and who left me to burn. 3 months later, I sat in my makeshift office, our dining table, staring at my laptop screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before typing. "To whom it may concern at Architectural Digest, I'm submitting Rebirth, a legacy continued, not just as a photography collection, but as a narrative about how spaces transform alongside the humans who inhabit them." I attached my portfolio along with carefully selected images from Grandpa's archive, my contemporary architectural photographs paired with his historical documentation of the same buildings decades earlier. Before hitting send, I added one final paragraph. "When I needed spinal surgery, my grandfather's inheritance saved my life after my wealthy parents refused to help." That experience fundamentally changed how I view spaces. They aren't just about aesthetics. They're about the people who inhabit them during their most vulnerable and triumphant moments. My finger hovered over the send button. This wasn't just a submission. It was the first deliberate step in my new path, one that would eventually force my parents to face what they'd done. I clicked send. 2 weeks later, my phone chimed with an email notification. The senior editor of Architectural Digest wanted to meet. I walked into their gleaming office, my newly purchased blazer covering the scar that ran down my spine. 3 editors examined my portfolio while I set up my presentation, hands steady as I arranged prints on the table. "Mr. Bennett," the senior editor began, "your submission is unlike anything we've seen recently. The juxtaposition of your grandfather's work with your own creates a compelling narrative about architectural evolution." I nodded, took a deep breath, and began my presentation, revealing photographs pair by pair. Historic banks transformed into community spaces. Factories reborn as artistic hubs. Abandoned mansions restructured into multifamily dwellings. The features editor checked her watch. Time for my final play. I pulled out the before and after images of Grandpa's cabin, now my cabin, which I'd renovated during my recovery. Last year, I discovered my grandfather had been documenting my life from afar. When I needed spinal surgery, and my parents, who live in a 7-bedroom mansion, refused to help, his inheritance saved me. The room stilled. Even the features editor looked up. I didn't just inherit his money. I inherited his vision. The ability to see beauty in transition, hope in transformation. I gestured to the details of the cabin renovation. The darkroom I'd built using his original equipment. The gallery wall showcasing both our work. The desk positioned perfectly to capture mountain light. That's what I do. I document spaces that remember the humans who inhabit them. The senior editor leaned forward. "Why do you deserve this feature, Mr. Bennett?" The question hung in the air. I thought of Jake selling his prized possessions without hesitation, of the physical therapist who stayed late to help me regain strength, of Grandpa Will watching over me from afar. "Because I've learned what matters," I answered simply. "And it's not what most people think." 3 days later, I was washing dinner dishes when the notification arrived. I checked my phone and read, "Architectural Digest is pleased to inform you that we've accepted your submission. The spread will run in our next issue. Contract details to follow. Initial payment, $50,000. The phone slipped from my fingers. Jake caught it, read the screen, and let out a whoop that brought our elderly neighbor knocking on the wall to check if everything was okay. He lifted me off my feet, careful of my still healing spine, spinning me in gentle circles while I sobbed and laughed simultaneously. "We did it," I breathed into Jake's shoulder. "We actually did it." But I wasn't finished. This wasn't just about success. It was about vindication. The next morning, I called the reporter who'd been trying to interview me about my grandfather's newly discovered archive and my own rising career in architectural photography. "I'm ready to tell my story," I said. "All of it." 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my actual studio. Not a corner of the apartment. Not a borrowed space in someone else's building. Bennett Legacy Photography, etched in brushed metal on the door. Behind me, 2 assistants cataloged Grandpa's remaining archives while an intern managed the growing list of client requests. My phone buzzed with a text from Blake. "Saw your feature in Architectural Digest. Mom and Dad talking about reaching out. Thought you should know." I wasn't surprised. I'd kept his number unblocked to stay informed about my parents through him. I deleted it without responding. A package sat on my desk. Inside was a framed print. My first major work post-surgery. A panoramic view of the city's skyline taken from Grandpa's cabin, now my weekend retreat. The photograph had sold at auction for $15,000, with proceeds benefiting a foundation I'd established to help artists with medical emergencies. Another text arrived. "Dad asking about family investment opportunity in your new venture." I smiled, thinking of the magazine interview I'd given yesterday. The journalist seemed particularly interested in how I built my business without family support. The truth would be published next week with my parents named explicitly. My assistant buzzed. "The museum curator is on line 1 about the William Bennett retrospective." "Take a message," I told her. "I'm heading to physical therapy, then meeting Jake for lunch." I gathered my things, looking once more at the framed print on my desk. Jake would be waiting at our favorite cafe, the one that had become our sanctuary during my recovery. My real family wasn't determined by blood, but by who showed up when it mattered most. 3 weeks later, my face stared back at me from the digital cover of Photographer's Journal. The headline read, "Rising from the Ashes, How Tragedy Sparked a Photographic Renaissance." The knot in my stomach tightened, then released. 3 years of work, pain, and perseverance captured in a single glossy image. Jake came up behind me, his hands warm on my shoulders. "It's real," he whispered. "It's real," I echoed, my voice catching. I scrolled down to the pull quote they'd highlighted in bold. "My own parents let me suffer for my brother's wedding." That's when I realized blood doesn't define family. The truth sat there undisguised and raw. The words I spoke during the interview without flinching. No pseudonyms, no vague references, just the unvarnished reality of that rainy night when my parents chose Blake's wedding over my health. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, his thumb tracing circles on my shoulder blade. "Not one." By afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. The article had been shared over 30,000 times. Photography influencers were praising my work and my integrity. 3 universities reached out about guest lectures before lunch. The first hint of fallout came from an unexpected source. Melissa Weber, who sat on the same charity board as my mother, called me directly. We'd met at a gallery opening months earlier, and she'd kept my card. "The Bennetts didn't come to the spring fundraiser," she began without preamble. "Richard claimed they had another engagement, but Elizabeth saw them pull up to the country club, then turn around and leave when they spotted the Kingstons." I said nothing, letting her continue. "Rumor has it their interior design firm has lost 5 corporate accounts in the last month. People talk, Lucas, and after that article, a text from Olivia arrived next. 'Just read your story. Blake never told me. Is it really true?' 2 days later, my assistant interrupted with news. Blake hadn't gotten the partnership he'd been pursuing. Apparently, his boss read the article and questioned his character and judgment. Blake threw a fit, accused me of sabotaging him. I looked around my growing studio, the wall of awards for our architectural preservation documentation, the framed mission statement about capturing moments of transformation. None of this built on vengeance, all of it constructed on the foundation that crisis revealed. The voicemails started in October. First from Victoria, her voice tight and controlled, despite the circumstances. Then from Richard, less composed with each message. I listened to each one once, then erased them, watching the notifications disappear one by one until the last one remained at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Lucas, please." Richard's voice cracked. "We have nowhere else to turn." I played it twice. The man who checked his watch while I begged for surgery money, now begging for my attention. 2 days later, they sat across from me in my studio, barely recognizable. Richard's silver hair had thinned, his shoulders stooped beneath his discount department store blazer. Victoria clutched her knockoff handbag, her once perfect makeup applied with a shaky hand. "Thank you for seeing us, Lucas." Richard attempted his boardroom voice, but it cracked around the edges. "You've done quite well for yourself." Victoria nodded too quickly. The magazine feature was lovely. Richard leaned forward with hands clasped, the same posture he used when negotiating with clients. "Families should stick together during difficult times. We're in trouble, son." Victoria's voice wavered. "The bank is foreclosing on the house. We owe almost $800,000. My gaze shifted to the photographs on my wall. The MRI image of my spine, artistically rendered as part of a series on vulnerability. The physical therapy sessions Jake had documented, showing my gradual return to strength. 1 year, 4 months, and 22 days, I said. They exchanged glances. "That's how long it's been since the night of Blake's engagement party." Richard shifted in his seat. "Lucas, it was raining. I came to you soaking wet. My shoes squeaked on your marble floor." My voice remained calm, factual. "Mom, you said, we simply can't, Lucas. Blake's wedding is in 3 months. Her face paled. "I don't think those were my exact." I reached for my phone, tapping the screen before setting it on the desk. Richard's voice filled the room. "Lucas, your irresponsible financial decisions aren't our problem. Blake manages his money properly. Perhaps you should take notes instead of asking for handouts. It reflects poorly on this family's reputation." I'd recorded his voicemail from that night, saving it all these years as a reminder of why I could never go back. The recording ended. Silence stretched between us. "Did you ever once visit me in the hospital?" I asked. Victoria's eyes dropped to her lap. Richard's throat worked soundlessly. Jake sold his entire record collection, things he'd been collecting since high school, to try to help me. My physical therapist offered free sessions when insurance ran out. They showed up. I stood, my palms flat against the cool surface of my desk. Do you know what I realized during recovery? That I'd spent my entire life trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Victoria's mascara smeared as tears tracked down her cheeks. With steady hands, I slid a folder across the desk toward them. "Take it," I said, "and leave. From this moment on, I'm no longer your son." Richard's fingers trembled as he opened the folder. Inside was a cashier's check for $800,000. "Exactly what you need," I told him. "Not a penny more." The irony wasn't lost on me. The amount was almost 9 times what they'd refused to give for my surgery, and I'd been able to gather it through my photography sales, Grandpa's inheritance, and the advances on my upcoming book. "Lucas?" Victoria started. "This isn't forgiveness." I cut her off. "It's freedom. Mine." They stood slowly, Richard clutching the folder like a life preserver. When the doors closed behind them, I remained standing until the sun dipped below the skyline, painting my studio in amber and shadow. My fingers brushed across Grandpa Will's photograph, the one he'd taken of himself, standing proudly beside his first published work. For years, I carried the weight of their rejection like stones in my pockets, dragging me under. Not anymore. "It's finally over," I whispered to the empty room. And for the first time since that rainy night, I felt the truth of those words in my bones. Not a weight lifted. A chain broke. The opening night of my exhibition, Inherited Vision, buzzed with energy. The gallery walls displayed my photographs alongside Grandpa Will's, our work spanning 6 decades of architectural evolution. Each pairing told a story of transformation, buildings, cities, and ultimately people. Jake moved through the crowd, handling questions from critics and collectors, with the ease of someone who knew every story behind every image. He'd become my business partner officially 6 months ago, his organizational skills and vision complementing my creative focus. "The series on medical recovery is particularly moving," a museum curator told me, gesturing to the corner where I displayed the most personal images. "The juxtaposition of institutional coldness with human warmth. Extraordinary." I nodded my thanks, moving toward the exhibition centerpiece. A triptych. Grandpa's original photograph of my parents' mansion when it was first built 40 years ago, my image of it taken the day I was refused help, and finally, a new construction rising from similar architectural bones. The artist retreat center I'd established with part of my inheritance. "Second chances at life," read the plaque beside it. "Buildings, like people, can be reborn with the right vision." My phone buzzed with a text from Blake. "Parents lost the house. Living in a condo now." Lauren called off the wedding. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. His problems weren't mine anymore. "There you are." Jake appeared at my side, champagne flutes in hand. "The New York Times critic just called your work a masterclass in visual storytelling, and 3 more pieces sold." I accepted the champagne, our fingers brushing. "We did it," I said, echoing our words from a year ago, but with a different meaning now. "To William Bennett." Jake raised his glass. "For seeing what others couldn't." "To chosen family," I countered, clinking my glass against his. Later that night, as we locked up the gallery, Jake paused before a photograph I'd taken of him during my recovery. He stood in a shaft of light, arranging my medications with the dedication of someone handling precious artifacts. "Why did you include this one?" he asked quietly. "It's not architectural." "Because it's about structure," I said. "The framework that holds us up when we can't stand alone." The drive to the cabin took us through winding mountain roads, autumn leaves creating a tunnel of gold and crimson. Jake handled the curves with practiced ease, familiar with every bend after countless trips during my convalescence. Grandpa's cabin, now our weekend retreat, waited at the end of the gravel drive, its weathered exterior restored, but not reimagined. I'd kept its character intact while updating the interior to accommodate both our needs. "Home," Jake sighed as we pulled up. "Home," I agreed, the word carrying weight beyond its single syllable. Inside, I moved through rooms that held the physical manifestation of my healing. The kitchen where Jake had patiently helped me relearn to cook when my hands still trembled. The deck where I had taken my first post-surgery photographs, seated because standing hurt too much. The office where I discovered boxes of Grandpa's journals, his thoughts on art and family providing guidance when I needed it most. "We have a visitor," Jake called from the front porch. I joined him, surprised to find an elderly woman standing at the bottom of the steps. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she clutched a faded photograph in hands spotted with age. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Lucas Bennett?" Her voice wavered slightly. "I am. William's grandson." "Not a question," I nodded, curious now. "I'm Eleanor Winters." She held out the photograph. "I knew your grandfather. We were close." The photograph showed a much younger Eleanor standing beside Grandpa Will, both laughing as they looked at a camera on a tripod. The cabin stood unfinished in the background. "He built this place for us," she said softly. "But then life got complicated. He married someone else." I moved away. Jake moved closer to my side, his presence steady and warm. "We reconnected in his final year." Eleanor continued. Too late for some things, but not too late for closure. Quote, "Would you like to come in?" I offered, gesturing to the cabin. "I think we have stories to share." Over tea in my living room, Eleanor unfolded a narrative I never knew. How William and she had been in love as young photographers. How family pressure had pushed him toward a suitable marriage. How they'd found each other again decades later, after spouses had passed and children had grown. "He talked about you constantly those last months," she said, eyes bright with unshed tears. "So proud of your talent. Furious at how your parents dismissed it." "He saved my life," I said simply. "In more ways than one." Eleanor nodded. "He wanted to do that for you while he was alive, but he was afraid Richard would prevent it somehow. The inheritance was his way of making sure." "Do you know about the falling out between them?" Jake asked. Lucas's father never spoke about it. Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "Oh, yes. William refused to give Richard money for a business venture he thought was exploitative. Richard never forgave him for not funding his dreams, while William was funding arts programs instead." "History repeats," I murmured. "But you broke the cycle." Eleanor reached across the table to pat my hand. "William knew you would." Before she left, Eleanor gave me a small leather case. "He wanted you to have this when you were ready. I think now's the time." Inside was Grandpa's original light meter, the one from his first professional assignment, and a handwritten note, "Measure the light, not others, expectations." That night, lying beside Jake in the bedroom that had become our sanctuary, I felt the final piece shift into place. "I've been thinking about the foundation," I said into the darkness. "The one for artists with medical needs?" "Yes, I want to expand it, make it more comprehensive, not just emergency funding, but preventative care, insurance navigation, wellness programs." Jake turned to face me, his outline visible in the moonlight streaming through the windows. "That's going to take significant resources." "I know. I'm going to sell my parents' mansion." He propped himself up on an elbow. "Your parents' mansion? You don't own that." "Not yet," I agreed. "But the bank is foreclosing, and I've already spoken to the loan officer. I can buy it at auction, probably for less than market value given the circumstances." "And then what? Live in it?" I laughed at the absurdity. "God, no. Convert it. Transform it into the foundation headquarters. Treatment rooms, gallery space, residences for artists recovering from medical procedures." Jake was silent for a long moment. "That's not revenge, Lucas. That's redemption." "Exactly." I found his hand in the darkness. "Grandpa didn't just leave me money. He left me a choice. I can be bitter about what happened, or I can change what happens next." "From the ashes," Jake murmured, echoing the title of my exhibition. "A phoenix," I agreed, "but one that lifts others as it rises." 6 months later, I stood in the echoing foyer of my parents' former mansion, watching as construction crews began the transformation. The crystal chandelier that once witnessed my humiliation had been donated to a historical society. The marble floors where I'd stood with a doctor's referral in hand were being replaced with sustainable bamboo. The study where my parents had refused to save my life would become a meditation space for recovering patients. "The East Wing is already framed out," Jake said, consulting the blueprints spread across a folding table. "We should have the first 5 resident rooms ready by next month." I nodded, trying to reconcile my memories of this space with its future purpose. "And the gallery space?" "On schedule for the grand opening. The acoustics in the former ballroom are perfect." The irony wasn't lost on me. The ballroom where Blake's engagement party had been held would soon showcase art created by people who'd faced medical crises and survived. Beauty from ashes. Quite literally. "Mr. Bennett?" A worker approached with a tablet. "We found something during demolition of the master suite." I followed him upstairs, each step a small victory for my healed spine. The worker pointed to a wall safe revealed behind the ornate paneling of what had been my parents' bedroom. "The combination?" he asked. I stared at the safe, remembering the countless times I'd been forbidden to enter this room as a child. "I have no idea." Jake appeared at my side. "Your birthday?" Anniversary dates? I shook my head. That would require sentimentality. After several failed attempts with dates significant to my parents, I tried one last combination. The date Blake was born. The safe swung open. Inside lay several velvet jewelry boxes, stock certificates, and a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. I lifted the bundle carefully, recognizing Grandpa Will's handwriting on the envelopes. They kept his letters, I whispered, shocked. All this time they pretended he never tried to contact us. Back in what was becoming the Foundation's office, I spread the letters across the desk, dozens of them, spanning decades. From the dates, the first had arrived shortly after the falling out between Grandpa and my father. I opened the earliest one with trembling fingers. "Richard," it began, "I know you believe I've betrayed you by not funding your business venture. Perhaps in time you'll understand that my refusal comes from concern, not disapproval. The development would displace hundreds of families with nowhere to go. Success built on others, suffering is no success at all. I remain your father, regardless of your anger. My door is always open." Letter after letter revealed a narrative I'd never known. Grandpa reaching out on birthdays and holidays, sending photographs of his travels, asking about Blake and me as we grew. The final letter, dated just weeks before his death, contained a line that made my breath catch. "I've met your son Lucas. The boy has your determination but his grandmother's eye. He sees what others miss. Don't make my mistake, Richard. Don't let pride cost you a relationship with your child. Some rifts can't be mended in time." Jake rested his hand on my shoulder. "They never told you. They let me believe he abandoned us." My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "That he didn't care. What are you going to do with these?" I gathered the letters carefully, returning them to their ribbon binding. "Include them in the exhibition. The whole story should be told." As the mansion's transformation continued, so did mine. The foundation, officially named Second Chance Arts and Healing, took shape around us. Each room designed with both beauty and function in mind. Architects, contractors, and designers donated time and materials after hearing our story. The morning of the auction for my parents, remaining possessions dawned clear and cold. I'd arranged for the proceeds to fund the foundation's first year of operational costs, a final symmetry to close the circle. Inside the mansion's former dining room, now cleared of its heavy furniture and oppressive drapes, auction attendees wandered among items tagged and catalogued. Victoria's jewelry collection, Richard's watches and cufflinks, the art they'd collected not for love but for status. I moved through the crowd anonymously, hearing snippets of conversation. "Such a shame about the Bennetts. Did you hear their son bought the place? Turning it into some kind of charity. After what they did to him, I'd have burned it down." Eleanor appeared at my elbow, elegant in a simple navy dress. "Quite the turnout," she observed. "More vultures than I expected," I admitted. "People love witnessing a fall from grace." She linked her arm through mine. "But you're not one of them, are you?" "No." I led her toward the former living room, where refreshments were set up. "I'm not here to celebrate their downfall. You're here to ensure their possessions fund the very thing they refuse to support. Healing." Her eyes twinkled. "William would appreciate the poetry of it." The auction began promptly at 11. I stood at the back, watching as items were presented and bid upon. My mother's sapphire bracelet, the one she'd clutched while refusing to help me, sold for $38,000 to a collector from New York. My father's prized first edition books went to a university library. When the gavel fell on the final item, a painting my parents had prominently displayed, but never actually looked at, I felt a curious lightness. The last physical ties severed. $1. $2 million, the auctioneer announced to applause. "Proceeds to benefit the Second Chance Foundation, as stipulated." Outside, a familiar car pulled into the circular drive. Blake stepped out, looking diminished somehow. His designer suit hung slightly loose, his confident stride replaced by hesitation. "Lucas," he called as I exited with Eleanor. "Can we talk?" I paused, surprised by his appearance. "About what?" He glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with potential witnesses. "Privately?" I turned to Eleanor. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" Quote. She squeezed my arm. "Of course. I'll be inside if you need me." Blake and I walked toward the garden, now being redesigned as a healing space for residents. Construction had yet to begin here, so the formal hedges and sterile flower beds remained as I remembered them. "I didn't know," Blake said abruptly, "about your surgery, not the full story." I raised an eyebrow. "You were there that night." "I knew you needed money for some procedure. I didn't know." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know you might never walk again without it." "Would it have made a difference?" He looked away. I want to say yes. At least he was honest about that. "Olivia left," he continued after a moment, "said she couldn't marry someone who would treat his own brother that way." "I'm sorry about that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "The wedding venue kept the deposit." Ironic, right? He attempted a laugh that fell flat. "The money that could have helped you ended up being wasted anyway." We reached the stone bench where our mother used to sit and critique the gardener's work. Blake lowered himself onto it, suddenly looking every bit his 34 years. "I lost the partnership," he said. "Firms downsizing after losing some key clients. Turns out, a lot of them read that article about you. I remained standing. I didn't write it to hurt you." "Didn't you?" His eyes, so like our father's, met mine. "Even a little?" "I wrote it to tell the truth," I said after a moment. "The fallout wasn't my goal." "Well," he gestured vaguely at the mansion behind us. "Mission accomplished anyway. They're living in a 2-bedroom condo. Dad's looking for work. Mom's selling her designer clothes online." I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt only a distant sadness for what could have been. "What do you want, Blake?" He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "A job." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me." "I need work. My severance runs out next month." His voice held a note I'd never heard before: humility. "I heard you're hiring administrative staff for the foundation." "You want to work for me?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "After everything? I have nowhere else to go." The words echoed our father's final voicemail to me. My name is toxic in finance now. I studied my brother, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. The golden child, favored and protected, now facing consequences he'd never been prepared for. "The foundation has a strict policy," I said finally. "Everyone who works here either has experienced medical crisis themselves or has supported someone through one." His shoulders slumped. "Right. Of course. So you'd need to volunteer first," I continued. 6 months minimum, proving your commitment before any paid position would be considered." His head snapped up. "You're offering me a chance." "I'm offering you what Grandpa offered Dad. An open door." I gestured to the mansion. "This place is about second chances. It would be hypocritical to deny you one." 2 weeks later, I stood on the temporary stage, erected in what had once been the mansion's grand foyer. Behind me, the newly installed wall of windows flooded the space with natural light. Before me sat 300 guests gathered for the official opening of Second Chance Arts and Healing Center. 3 years ago, I began, I stood in this very spot and was told that my life wasn't worth saving if it cost too much. The audience stilled, many already familiar with my story from the articles and interviews. "I could have died from bitterness alone," I continued. "Instead, I found salvation in unexpected places. A roommate who sold his prized possessions. A grandfather I barely knew who left me everything. An elderly woman who helped me understand that family is created through choices, not merely blood." From the front row, Jake gave me an encouraging nod. Beside him sat Eleanor, elegant in a vintage dress that had once belonged to my grandmother. Today, we open the doors of Second Chance, not as a monument to what was lost, but as a testament to what can be rebuilt. Every year, we'll provide residency and medical support to 20 artists facing health crises. Every month, our gallery will showcase work created during recovery. Every day, our doors will be open to those who need a space to heal both body and spirit. I gestured to the commemorative plaque being unveiled beside the entrance. "In honor of William Bennett, who taught me that the light we measure isn't just what enters our cameras, but what we allow into our hearts." The applause was thunderous, punctuated by a few wiping away tears. After the ceremony, as guests toured the facility, I found myself in the former study, now a sun-filled meditation room. The heavy desk where my father had sat in judgment was gone, replaced by comfortable cushions and living plants. The Persian rug where I'd stood pleading had been donated to a museum. "Quite a transformation," a voice said from the doorway. I turned to find Blake standing there awkwardly, wearing the volunteer lanyard he'd been issued that morning. "In more ways than one." I agreed. He stepped into the room, looking around with wonder. "I don't even recognize it?" "That's the point." He nodded, understanding dawning. "You haven't just changed the building, you've changed its purpose." "Exactly." I moved toward the window overlooking the garden, where landscapers were installing accessible pathways. Spaces hold energy. This one held fear and rejection. Now it will hold healing and creativity. "And me?" Blake asked quietly. "What will I hold?" I studied my brother, the person who had everything handed to him his entire life, now starting from scratch. "That's entirely up to you." Later that evening, when the guests had departed and only staff remained, I made my way to what had once been my childhood bedroom. Now it was simply Office 3B, with no trace of the boy who had dreamed of capturing beauty through a lens. Jake found me there, standing by the window that overlooked the property's eastern edge. "You okay?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. "Better than okay," I said, leaning slightly against his solid presence. "I was just thinking about perspective. Photography talk?" He smiled. "Life talk." I gestured to the view. From this window, I used to watch Grandpa Will's car come up the drive on the rare occasions he visited. He always brought a camera for me. Nothing fancy, disposable ones from the drugstore. My parents would confiscate them after he left. "But not before you used them?" I laughed softly. "Not before I filled them with images. Weird angles, close-ups of insects. Dad called them wastes of film." "And William?" "Had them developed anyway. Sent prints back and birthday cards." Jake wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "He saw your potential." "He saw me," I corrected gently. "Most people look, few actually see." We stood in comfortable silence, watching as twilight painted the grounds in soft purples and blues. "Blake might actually be good at volunteer coordination," Jake said after a while. "He organized the refreshments today without being asked." "Small steps?" I agreed, but steps nonetheless. My phone buzzed with a text message. I checked it, surprised to see an unfamiliar number. "Lucas," it read. "This is Victoria. I want you to know I'm proud of what you've done with the house. It's better this way." I showed Jake the message. "Are you going to respond?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment, then typed, "Thank you. The first residency program starts next week. 5 artists with medical needs." Her reply came quickly. "Your grandmother would have loved that. She was an artist too." Another piece of family history I'd never known. I put the phone away, making a mental note to ask Eleanor about my grandmother's art. Another legacy to explore, perhaps another exhibition to curate. "What now?" Jake asked as we prepared to leave for the evening. I took one last look at the transformed space, no longer a monument to wealth and status, but a sanctuary for healing and creation. "Now we do the work," I said simply, one second chance at a time. 6 months later, I stood in the gallery space that had once been the mansion's ballroom, surrounded by the first exhibition of resident artists' work. 5 creators who had faced medical crises similar to mine, displayed their journey through various mediums. Alexandra's sculptures documented her changing body through cancer treatment. Marco's photographs captured the hospital room, where he'd spent 9 months recovering from a spinal injury. Delia's paintings transformed MRI images into vivid landscapes of inner space. Robert's installation used sound and light to recreate the experience of losing and regaining vision. Sanvi's textile works incorporated her surgical sutures into delicate embroidery. "Incredible turnout," Jake murmured, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "The waiting list for the next residency program has hit 300 applications." I accepted the glass, scanning the crowded room. Art critics mingled with medical professionals. Former patients chatted with potential donors. In the corner, Blake directed volunteer staff with unexpected competence. His 6-month probation period nearly complete. "Have you seen who just arrived?" Jake nodded toward the entrance. My parents stood hesitantly in the doorway, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Victoria clutched her purse. No longer designer, but still elegant. Richard's posture remained straight, though his hair had gone completely white. "Should I ask them to leave?" Jake asked quietly. I shook my head. "They're here as guests, like anyone else." I watched as they moved uncertainly through the exhibition, pausing longest before Marco's photographs of spinal surgery recovery. The parallel to my own experience wasn't subtle. Victoria wiped her eyes discreetly. "They're looking at the price list," Jake noted. "Think they're buying?" "On their budget? Doubtful." Yet minutes later, I observed Richard speaking with the gallery manager, pointing to one of Marco's smaller pieces. A sale was recorded, a modest one by the evening standards, but significant given their reduced circumstances. Near the exhibition's end, as guests began to depart, I found myself alone before the wall of letters, Grandpa Will's correspondence displayed alongside photographs from his archives and my own work. The narrative of 3 generations of Bennett men, their conflicts and connections laid bare. "He would be proud," Eleanor said, joining me. "William always believed in bringing truth to light." "Even painful truth?" "Especially that kind." She adjusted her glasses to better see the display. "Healing doesn't happen in darkness." I nodded, thinking of the residents who had created such powerful work from their pain. The next exhibition will feature artists working through emotional trauma, rather than physical. Different healing, same process. Bringing the invisible to light, she approved. Perfect. As the final guest departed, I found myself approaching my parents, who lingered awkwardly near the exit. "Thank you for coming," I said formally. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "It's remarkable what you've done with the place." Richard nodded stiffly. "Very impressive business model. Sustainable. Trust my father to view a healing center through a financial lens." "Blake seems to be doing well," Victoria ventured. "He mentions his work here sometimes when he calls." "He's finding his way," I acknowledged. "The volunteer coordinator position will be his if he wants it after next month." Richard cleared his throat. "We saw the piece you purchased at auction." I raised an eyebrow, unsure which item he meant. "Mother's sapphire bracelet," he clarified. "In the historical jewelry display upstairs." "Ah, that. I thought it belonged with the foundation," I said carefully. "As part of the story." What I didn't say was that I'd placed it beside a photograph of Victoria, refusing my plea for help while clutching that very bracelet. Context mattered. "We should go," Richard said, checking his watch. "A simple timepiece now, not the Rolex he once wore. Our ride is waiting." As they turned to leave, Victoria paused, turning back. "Lucas, She stopped, seeming to search for words. "I'm sorry we failed you." The simple acknowledgement, too late but finally spoken, hung in the air between us. "I know," I said quietly. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition of a truth too long denied." Later that night, in the small apartment Jake and I had created in the mansion's former guest wing, I stood at the window overlooking the transformed estate. Lights illuminated the healing garden, where residents could walk meditative paths. The studio spaces glowed with late-night creativity. The medical wing stood ready for those needing care. From the ashes of rejection, something beautiful had emerged. Not because of my parents' cruelty, but despite it. Not through bitterness, but through purposeful reconstruction. Jake joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was thinking about Grandpa's light meter," I said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "How he taught me to measure light, not expectations." "And? The light here is good," I said simply. "Very good indeed." 1 year after the Second Chance Arts and Healing Center opened its doors, I stood in the expanded gallery space, surrounded by the success stories that lined the walls. No longer just photographs and paintings, but lives transformed. The center had grown beyond my wildest expectations, with 3 additional locations across the country and plans for international expansion. The morning light streamed through the skylights I'd designed, illuminating the interactive exhibition titled Full Circle. Each installation represented a resident artist's journey from diagnosis to recovery, documented through their chosen medium. Visitors moved through the space wearing headphones, that played recordings of the artists describing their experiences in their own words. "The Seattle location is confirmed," Jake said, joining me with a tablet displaying architectural plans. "The old hospital building downtown. Perfect symmetry. A place that once healed bodies will now nurture artistic souls too." I nodded, studying the blueprints. "The natural light in the former solarium will make an incredible studio space." "Blake's already assembling the volunteer team for the West Coast launch," Jake continued. "He's actually quite good at it. Who knew your brother had organizational skills?" I smiled, thinking of Blake's transformation over the past year. From entitled golden child to dedicated program coordinator, he'd found purpose in helping others rebuild their lives. His finance background, once used to accumulate wealth, now served to maximize the foundation's impact with limited resources. "The New York Times feature comes out tomorrow," Jake reminded me. "The photographer was quite thorough." "Too thorough," I laughed. 3 days of shooting for one article. Because it's not just about the foundation anymore, it's about the movement. Jake's eyes shone with pride. 37 medical institutions have adopted our arts therapy program. 17 insurance companies now cover creative recovery services. A young woman in a wheelchair approached, her service dog trotting faithfully beside her. I recognized her immediately. Amara, our third resident, whose dance-inspired sculptures had sold out at her first exhibition. "Lucas, Jake." She greeted us warmly. "I wanted to show you this before the ceremony." She handed me an envelope bearing the letterhead of a prestigious art school. I got in. Full scholarship. "Amara, that's incredible!" I embraced her carefully, mindful of her still healing body. "I couldn't have done it without second chance," she said, her eyes bright. "Not just the residency, but the portfolio development, the connections, the confidence." "You did the work," Jake reminded her. "We just provided the space." "Space is everything when you're rebuilding yourself," she said simply. As Amara moved away to greet other staff members, I felt the familiar warmth of knowing we'd made a difference. Not just in creating art, but in creating possibility. "It's time," Jake murmured, glancing at his watch. "The dedication ceremony starts in 10 minutes. We made our way to the mansion's former library, now transformed into an intimate auditorium. The bookcases that once housed my father's leather-bound status symbols now contained the published works of resident artists. Photography books, poetry collections, exhibition catalogs, graphic novels. Creativity flowing from the same space where creativity had once been stifled. The room filled quickly with foundation supporters, medical partners, resident artists, and media representatives. In the back row, I spotted Richard and Victoria, sitting quietly but attentively. They'd become regular attendees at foundation events, never imposing, simply witnessing. Their presence was neither welcomed nor discouraged, like distant relatives at a family gathering, acknowledged but not centered. Blake entered last, ushering in Eleanor, who now served as the foundation's historian, documenting our growth and impact. At 92, she remained sharp as ever, her fingers flying over her tablet as she recorded observations for the archive. "Welcome, everyone," I began as the room settled. "Today marks not just the first anniversary of Second Chance, but a new chapter in our development." I gestured to the architectural renderings displayed on the screen behind me. With centers opening in Seattle and Chicago next year, and a partnership with the National Endocrinology Institute, we're expanding our mission beyond the arts. The Second Chance Medical Innovation Fund will provide grants to researchers developing treatments for conditions currently considered untreatable or terminal. Applause rippled through the audience. But today's most significant announcement is more personal. I paused, making eye contact with Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. "We're establishing the William Bennett Scholarship for Documentary Photography. Each year, 5 photographers facing medical hardship will receive full funding for equipment, education, and healthcare." More applause, stronger this time. "And to launch this initiative, we have a special announcement." I gestured to Jake, who stepped forward with a large portfolio case. While cataloging my grandfather's archives, we discovered a collection of photographs never before exhibited or published. Taken during the Civil Rights Movement, these images document moments of transformation in our nation's history through William's unique lens. Jake opened the portfolio, revealing black and white photographs of extraordinary power and intimacy. Marchers seen not as a mass movement, but as individuals with hopes and fears written clearly on their faces. Leaders captured in quiet moments of doubt, and triumph, the machinery of oppression juxtaposed with the humanity of resistance. Christie's has valued this collection at $7 million. I continued. The sale will fully fund the scholarship program for its first decade. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. From the back, I saw Victoria cover her mouth with her hand, tears streaming freely now. Richard sat motionless, his expression unreadable. This discovery is a reminder that value isn't always visible at first glance, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling within me. What appears worthless to some may prove priceless to others. What seems broken beyond repair may contain the seeds of its own rebuilding. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled in the reception area, I found myself face to face with my parents. A year of regular, if distant, contact had eased the sharp edges of our interactions, though true reconciliation remained elusive. "Your grandfather's photographs are remarkable," Richard said, his voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. "I never appreciated his talent." "Few did," I acknowledged. "He was ahead of his time." "Like you," Victoria said softly. I accepted the compliment with a nod, neither rejecting nor embracing the attempted connection. "We have something for you," Richard continued, withdrawing an envelope from his jacket pocket. "It's not much, but—" I accepted it cautiously, opening it to find a check for $90,000, the exact amount I had once begged them for. "We've been saving," Victoria explained, "from our Social Security, Richard's consulting work, my online sales." "For the foundation?" I asked, confused by the specific amount. Richard shook his head. "For you. What we should have given you then." I stared at the check, emotions swirling. The symmetry was almost too perfect. The exact sum, offered too late to serve its original purpose, yet perfectly timed to illustrate how far we'd all traveled. "I can't accept this personally," I said finally, "but the foundation could use it to fund an emergency medical grant for an artist in crisis, one who doesn't have a William Bennett to save them." Relief washed over Victoria's face. "Yes, please, that would be perfect." "We'll name it for Blake's fiancée," I decided impulsively. "The Olivia Grant, for those who need immediate intervention." Richard's eyes widened slightly. "That's very generous." "It's not about generosity," I clarified. "It's about purpose. This money was originally meant to save a life. Now it will." Later that evening, as the reception wound down, I found Blake in the gallery, studying a photograph I'd taken during my recovery. It showed my hands, still trembling from medication, attempting to adjust a camera lens. "I never really understood what you went through," he said without turning around. "Even after reading the articles, seeing the exhibitions, it wasn't real to me." I moved to stand beside him. "You weren't meant to understand. You were the golden child, protected from unpleasantness." "Protected from reality," he corrected, finally facing me. "From consequences. From empathy. And now," he gestured to the gallery around us, to the stories of struggle and triumph displayed on its walls. "Now I see it every day, not just physical pain, but the courage it takes to transform it into something meaningful." From across the room, Jake caught my eye, tilting his head in silent question. "Everything okay?" I nodded slightly. "Olivia called yesterday," Blake said, his voice carefully neutral. "She's engaged again." "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. She was right to leave. I wasn't the person she thought she was marrying. And now? Now I'm—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm becoming someone I might actually respect." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. This careful détente between us, not the Hollywood reconciliation where all hurts are magically healed. But it was something real. A recognition of change, of growth, of possibility. "The Seattle Center will need a financial director," I said after a moment. "Someone who understands both the numbers and the mission." Blake's eyebrows rose. "Are you offering me a job? A real one?" "I'm suggesting you apply," I clarified. "The hiring committee makes the final decision. But yes, with a recommendation from me. I'd need to relocate." "Fresh start," I nodded. "New perspectives." He considered this, looking around at the space that had once symbolized our family's status and now represented something entirely different. "I think I'd like that." The following morning I awoke before dawn, slipping quietly from bed without waking Jake. I drove to Grandpa Will's cabin, our weekend retreat, arriving just as the first light painted the mountain ridges in gold and crimson. With practiced movements, I set up my tripod at the spot where Grandpa had taken his first photograph of the property decades ago. The cabin had evolved over the years, expanded, renovated, modernized, but its soul remained intact, like me, like all of us who survive profound transformation. I pressed the shutter, capturing the moment when night surrendered to day, when what was hidden became visible. The perfect metaphor for the journey that had brought me here. Back inside, I brewed coffee and opened my laptop, reviewing the final draft of my book manuscript. Second Chances, Rebuilding After Devastation, told not just my story, but those of 20 former residents who had found their artistic voices during medical crisis. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Missing you. Meeting with the Chicago architects at 2. Don't forget." I smiled, typing back. "Watching the sunrise from Grandpa's favorite spot. Home by noon. Love you." 3 years had passed since that rainy night, when my parents chose my brother's wedding over my surgery. 3 years of pain, growth, discovery, and ultimately purpose. The path hadn't been linear. Healing rarely is, but each step, even the painful ones, had led me exactly where I needed to be. A knock at the cabin door startled me. Opening it, I found Eleanor standing there, a portfolio tucked under her arm despite the early hour. "I knew I'd find you here," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I couldn't wait to show you what I found." She spread the contents of the portfolio across the dining table, photographs I'd never seen before. Grandpa Will as a young man standing beside a much younger Eleanor, both holding cameras, laughing in the sunlight. "These were in a box I kept all these years," she explained. "William and I, before life separated us, before the choices that defined us both." I examined the images carefully, the composition, the light, the moment captured, all bearing Grandpa's unmistakable style. But there was something else. These aren't all his work, I realized, noting subtle differences in perspective. "Some of these are yours." Eleanor nodded, her smile widening. "We taught each other, borrowed techniques, challenged conventions. You were a photographer too." The missing piece clicked into place. "Until marriage and children and expectations redirected my path," she confirmed. "But I never stopped seeing the world through that lens, even when I didn't have a camera in hand." I studied a particularly striking image. Eleanor captured mid-laugh, her camera raised, Will watching her with undisguised adoration. "He loved you," I said softly. "As I loved him." She touched the photograph gently. "But timing is everything, in photography and in life." Our moment passed. Until the end, when we found each other again. "Why are you showing me these now?" Her eyes, still sharp despite her age, held mine. "Because you've been so focused on what was lost, you might miss what's been found. Your story isn't just about survival or even success. It's about rediscovering connections that were always there, waiting to be developed, like film exposed to light at exactly the right moment." 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming lobby of the Seattle Second Chance Center, watching as the first group of resident artists settled into their studios. The converted hospital retained hints of its medical past: wide corridors, abundant natural light, spaces designed for healing, now repurposed for creative recovery. Blake moved efficiently through the space, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers and answering questions with unexpected patience. The financial director position suited him, structured enough to utilize his analytical skills, meaningful enough to engage his newly discovered empathy. "The Chicago location breaks ground next month," Jake said, joining me by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. "And the London partners called. They've secured a building in Kensington." I nodded, taking in the expansion that had once seemed impossible. "And the medical research grants?" "First round of funding announced tomorrow. 7 researchers developing treatments for spinal cord injuries. Dr. Reardon is leading the review committee." My phone buzzed with a notification from our foundation's social media director. The documentary about Second Chance had just won a prestigious film festival award. Another platform to share our message. Another opportunity to reach those who needed to hear that devastation wasn't the end of their story. As sunset painted the western sky in dramatic streaks of orange and purple, residents and staff gathered for the official opening ceremony. I stood slightly apart, observing rather than participating, letting Blake and the local team take center stage. This was their accomplishment as much as mine. Richard and Victoria had flown in for the event, maintaining their cautious presence in my life. They sat in the audience, applauding at appropriate moments, neither attempting to claim credit nor deflecting responsibility for the journey that had led here. "Your grandfather would be proud," Eleanor murmured, appearing beside me with her uncanny ability to know exactly where she was needed. "Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become in building it." I squeezed her hand gently. "I used to think this was about proving them wrong," I admitted, nodding toward my parents. "About turning their rejection into something they'd regret. And now?" "Now, I understand it was never about them at all." I gestured to the residents, the staff, the space itself. It was about creating what I needed but couldn't find. A place where healing and creativity aren't separate journeys, but the same path viewed through different lenses. The audience rose in a standing ovation as Blake concluded his welcome speech. Jake caught my eye from across the room, his smile conveying pride and partnership in equal measure. Later that night, after the guests had departed and only the overnight staff remained, I wandered through the quiet building. Each studio space waited expectantly for its occupant to begin their work. Each resident's suite stood ready to provide comfort during difficult days. Each meditation garden offered peaceful sanctuary for contemplation. In the main gallery, I paused before the central installation, a collaborative work created by former residents from the original center. Titled simply Before/After, it incorporated elements from each artist's medical journey transformed into expressions of their current reality. A hospital gown reconstructed into a sculptural dress, IV tubing woven into an intricate tapestry, MRI films repurposed as stained glass, X-rays illuminated like star maps, prescription bottles filled with handwritten affirmations instead of medications. My contribution stood in the center, a spinal brace encased in resin, suspended within a frame constructed from wood salvaged from Grandpa's original cabin. Embedded in the resin were photographs documenting my journey, the rejection, the surgery, the recovery, the rebuilding. Not a shrine to suffering, but a testament to transformation. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. I opened it to find a photo of the original mansion, now the flagship Second Chance Center, illuminated at night. The caption read simply, "From the darkness, light emerges. Thank you for showing me how to see again. Oh, Olivia." Blake's former fiancée. The unexpected catalyst in a chain reaction that had changed countless lives, including her own. I saved the image, making a mental note to include it in our annual report. Another perspective on the journey we'd all taken, separately yet somehow together. In the quiet gallery, surrounded by evidence of human resilience, I thought about Grandpa Will's final gift to me. Not just the money that saved my life, but the example that shaped it. The understanding that what others dismiss might be precisely what saves us in the end. The light meter he'd left me sat in my office, not as a relic but as a daily reminder. Measure the light, not others' expectations. See what is illuminated, not what remains in shadow. Focus on capturing the moment of transformation, when something broken begins to heal, when something lost finds its way home. Outside, the Seattle skyline glittered against the night sky. Inside, new beginnings waited for morning light. Between these spaces, the public and private, the broken and healed, the lost and found, lay the truth I discovered through pain and rebuilt through purpose. Second chances aren't given. They're created, one deliberate choice at a time. The foundation would continue to grow, reaching more artists in crisis, funding more medical research, creating more spaces for transformation. But the real legacy wasn't in buildings or programs or even art. It was in the simple truth that rejection need not define us. That sometimes, being denied what we think we need, leads us to create what others didn't know they were missing. As I turned to leave, my phone lit up with a final message for the night. Jake, waiting patiently at our hotel. Coming home soon? I smiled at his choice of words. Home. No longer a place that rejected me, but a connection that sustained me. Not the mansion my parents had denied me access to, nor even the cabin my grandfather had left me, but the space created between people who choose each other, day after day. On my way, I replied, just finishing the circle. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.